Mr. Abernathy was a unicorn in the brutal world of city renting. He was my landlord, a kind, fatherly man with a gentle smile and a toolbox he actually knew how to use. He'd lived in the building for 40 years, and he treated his tenants less like sources of income and more like an extended, slightly dysfunctional family. The apartment itself was a dream, a spacious one-bedroom with pre-war details and a rent that was so far below market value it felt like a secret. When I moved in, I didn't just feel lucky, I felt safe. I felt like I had come home. For the first year, life was idyllic. Mr. Abernathy would leave a small pot of jam he'd made on my doorstep in the fall, and he'd always remember my birthday with a cheerful, handwritten card. He was the perfect landlord, the perfect neighbor. He was the man who made me believe that good, simple people still existed in the world. And that belief, I would soon learn, was the most dangerous thing of all. The first hint that something was wrong was a sound. A high-pitched electronic whine, so faint it was almost imperceptible. It came from the ceiling in my living room, somewhere near the smoke detector. I dismissed it at first. Old building, old wiring. It was probably nothing. But the sound was persistent. It was a constant, almost subliminal note in the quiet of my apartment. A tiny, sharp pinprick in the bubble of my peace. One night, the sound was driving me crazy. I stood on a chair, my ear pressed to the smoke detector. The whine was definitely coming from inside it. I figured the battery was dying in a strange way. I twisted the plastic casing off its mount to replace it. The 9-volt battery was there, connected properly. But next to it was something else, something that did not belong. A tiny circuit board, a miniature antenna, and a small black lens no bigger than the head of a pin peeking through a perfectly drilled hole in the casing. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. A camera. A tiny, hidden camera nestled inside the one object in my apartment that was supposed to protect me from danger. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the back of the chair to keep from falling. My sanctuary, my safe place, was a stage, and I had been performing, unknowingly, for an audience of one. My first thought was him, Mr. Abernathy, but my mind immediately recoiled from the idea. It was impossible. It had to be the previous tenant, some forgotten, perverted piece of trash. Mr. Abernathy, the man who brought me jam? He couldn't be capable of such a violation. He was a good man. But if there was one, were there more? The thought was a spark that lit a fire of pure, undiluted paranoia. I spent the rest of that night tearing my apartment apart. I wasn't just cleaning, I was conducting a forensic sweep. I ran my fingers over every surface, peered into every crack and crevice. And I found them. They were everywhere. There was one in the digital clock on my bedside table, its lens a tiny, dead eye in the center of the number 8. There was one in the carbon monoxide detector in the hallway. There was another, the most sickening of all, in the base of the air freshener plugged into the wall of my bathroom. They were all small, professionally installed, and nearly invisible. The man who had put them there was not an amateur. He was an expert. I felt a terror so cold and so absolute, it was like being plunged into ice water. My entire life in this apartment, every private, unguarded moment, sleeping, crying, getting dressed, had been a show. I had been a specimen under a microscope, my life a collection of data points for a faceless observer. I sat on my living room floor surrounded by the dismantled guts of my own surveillance, and I cried. I cried for the loss of my safety, for the death of the illusion I had so happily lived in. But who was watching? The question hammered at my brain. It still couldn't be him. It just couldn't. I needed proof. I needed to know where the feed was going. The next morning, I feigned a problem with my Wi-Fi. I knew Mr. Abernathy was good with tech stuff. I called him, my voice a perfect imitation of a damsel in distress. He was at my door in minutes, his kind, crinkling eyes full of concern. "Don't you worry, my dear," he patted my shoulder. "We'll have you back online in a jiffy." He sat at my desk, tapping away at my laptop. I watched him, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. He was so kind, so helpful. I was the crazy one. I was the paranoid one. And then, he made a mistake. He was checking the list of devices connected to my network. "Well, that's odd," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, it's just this one device," he said, pointing to a line of text on the screen. "It has a strange name. Dollhouse 07. It's eating up a lot of your bandwidth. It's probably just a neighbor's device interfering. I'll block it for you." He clicked a few buttons, smiled his fatherly smile, and told me everything was fixed. My blood ran cold. Dollhouse. The word was so specific, so chillingly intentional. He thought he was helping me. He had no idea he had just handed me the key to his own dark kingdom. That night, after I was sure he was asleep in his apartment downstairs, I went back to my laptop. I unblocked the device. I ran a network analysis program, something my tech-savvy brother had installed for me ages ago. I traced the IP address of Dollhouse 07. It wasn't a neighbor's Wi-Fi. It was a hardwired, encrypted server, and it was originating from within my own building, from his apartment. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the picture it formed was monstrous. It was him. It had always been him. The kindness was a mask. The fatherly concern was a costume. He was the one watching. But why? I knew I couldn't access his server directly, but the IP address was a thread. I opened a Tor browser, a tool for navigating the dark, hidden corners of the internet. I felt a profound sense of dread, as if I were about to open a door to a room I could never leave. I typed in the IP address. It led me to a simple, black screen with a single login portal. The name of the site was written in a clean, minimalist font at the top of the page. The Dollhouse. I couldn't get in without a password, but I didn't need to. A quick search of the site's name on the dark web forums gave me everything I needed to know. It was a pay-per-view site, a private, invitation-only platform where subscribers paid in cryptocurrency to watch live feeds from hidden cameras, feeds of women in their own homes. The subscribers were called watchers, and the women were called dolls. I felt a vomit-inducing wave of vertigo. I was not just being watched by my landlord, I was being broadcast. My life was a commodity, a product being sold to a faceless, anonymous audience of strangers. My privacy, my safety, my very humanity had been monetized. I scrolled through the public-facing page of the site, a gallery of thumbnails advertising the different dolls. And then I saw it. A thumbnail image, a still from a live feed. It was a grainy, night vision shot of a woman sleeping peacefully in her bed. The woman was me. The caption underneath it read, Doll#7, the girl next door. A truly authentic, unguarded experience. Live now. I stared at my own sleeping face on the screen, and the world dissolved into a silent, screaming roar. My breath was a ragged, shallow thing in my chest. I was not a person. I was content. Doll#7. The name was a brand, a label that stripped me of all identity, reducing me to an object to be consumed. How many of them were there? How many men, sitting in the anonymous darkness of their own rooms, were watching me right now, at this very moment, as I stared at a screen that proved my entire life was a lie? The rage, when it came, it was a physical force. It was a white-hot, cleansing fire that burned away the shock and the terror. He had not just violated my privacy, he had packaged and sold my soul. The kind, fatherly man who brought me jam was a digital pimp, and I was his prize commodity. The below-market rent, the perfect apartment, it wasn't a kindness, it was a business expense. He wasn't just my landlord, he was my producer, the director of a sick 24/7 reality show. My first instinct was to run, to pack a bag, shatter the cameras, and disappear into the night. But where would I go? And what would that solve? He would just find a new doll, a new girl to move into his perfectly wired stage. The thought of another woman, unsuspecting and vulnerable, living in this digital prison was something I could not stomach. I could not let him get away with it. I couldn't just escape. I had to destroy him. But how? He was smart. He was careful. The dark web was a fortress of anonymity. A simple police report felt inadequate. It was my word, the word of a hysterical doll, against a respected long-term member of the community. He would deny it. He would claim I was crazy. He probably already built a narrative of my instability for his neighbors, for the other tenants. I needed more than a suspicion. I needed irrefutable, undeniable proof. I needed to get inside his kingdom. My plan began to form around a single, terrifying idea. I had to become a willing participant in his show. I had to give his watchers a performance they would never forget, a performance so compelling that it would lure the king out of his castle. I started by changing my behavior. I was no longer the quiet, private woman who spent her evenings reading. I became a character. I would walk around the apartment in my best lingerie. I would leave my bedroom door open when I slept. I would talk to myself, spinning sad, fictional stories about a lonely girl in a big city. I was playing the part of the perfect victim, the perfect doll. It was the most disgusting, degrading thing I have ever done. I felt a profound sense of self-loathing with every calculated move, but I also felt a strange, cold sense of power. I was no longer the unwitting star of his show. I was the new director, and I was writing a final act he would never see coming. My goal was to create a surge in his viewership, to make Doll #7 the most popular feed on his sick little network. And it worked. I used a public Wi-Fi network and the Tor browser to monitor the forums associated with the site. I saw the chatter. The watchers were intrigued by the change in my behavior. Something's up with number 7. She's becoming more interesting. My viewership numbers, which were visible on a public counter next to my thumbnail, began to climb. Now that I had his audience's attention, I needed to get his. I needed to create a problem that only he, the kind, helpful landlord, could solve. I accidentally broke the faucet in my bathroom sink, creating a steady, unstoppable leak. Water was pooling on the floor. I called him, my voice a perfect imitation of frantic, feminine helplessness. "Mr. Abernathy, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my sink just burst. There's water everywhere." He was at my door in minutes, his face a mask of fatherly concern. "Don't you worry, my dear," he said, rushing past me with his toolbox. "I'll have it fixed in a jiffy." As he knelt by the sink, his back to the room, I put the next part of my plan into motion. I knew there was a camera in the air freshener. I accidentally tripped, stumbling towards the wall, and knocked the air freshener off its outlet. It clattered to the floor. "Oh, I'm so clumsy," I said, my voice full of flustered apology. I bent down to pick it up, and in that split second, I did what I had been practicing for days. With a tiny screwdriver I had palmed in my hand, I pried open the plastic casing just enough to insert the payload. A miniature GPS tracker, no bigger than a grain of rice. I snapped the casing shut and plugged it back into the wall. The entire operation took less than 5 seconds. He fixed the sink, ever the hero. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "You know," he said, his eyes full of that familiar, gentle warmth, "you seem different lately. Happier. It's good to see." The comment was so chilling, so laden with his own sick, secret knowledge, that it almost broke my composure. "Just trying to come out of my shell a little bit," I said with a shy smile. The GPS tracker was a gamble. I didn't know if he would ever move the camera, but my performance had made me his star. I was his most valuable asset. And I knew, from reading the forums, that the watchers were always demanding new angles, new views. I was betting on his greed. I was right. A week later, I watched on a live feed from a library computer as he entered my apartment while I was at work. He was there to upgrade my experience. He went straight to the bathroom, unplugged the air freshener, and put it in his pocket. He replaced it with a new one in a slightly different position. He had taken the bait. My Trojan horse was inside his walls. I spent the next few days tracking the GPS. It was a small blue dot on a map on my phone. For a while, it was stationary, in his apartment, just as I expected. But then one evening, the dot began to move. It traveled across the city to an anonymous-looking office park in an industrial neighborhood. It stayed there for a few hours, and then it returned. This was it. This had to be his nerve center, the place where he ran his digital kingdom. Now that I had a location, I needed a way in. I knew I couldn't go to the police yet. A GPS tracker on a camera I had stolen and tampered with was legally murky at best. They would need more. I had to get inside that office, and for that, I needed a key. My plan for the key was even more audacious, even more dangerous. I knew from my research that his entire operation was funded by cryptocurrency. It was anonymous, untraceable, but it had one weakness. It had to be converted to real money at some point. I started a deep dive into his finances. It was a long, painstaking process of cross-referencing public records, property deeds, and business licenses. And I found a thread. He was the sole proprietor of a small, innocuous-sounding company, Abernathy Home Maintenance and Repair. It was a shell company, a front, and it had a bank account. I couldn't access the account, but I could watch it. I set up alerts. I was waiting for a large transfer, a sign that he was cashing out his crypto earnings. The alert came on a Thursday, a huge deposit, far larger than any income he could be making from his maintenance company. The next day, Friday, I knew he would go to the bank. It was his routine. I waited outside his bank, my heart a frantic drum. I watched him go in. I gave him 10 minutes, and then I did something I never thought I was capable of. I walked over to his car, an old, unremarkable sedan, and I put a tire iron through his front passenger side window. The sound of the shattering glass was the sound of my own fear breaking. I ran. I hid in a nearby alleyway, and I called him, my voice a torrent of panicked sobs. "Mr. Abernathy, oh my God, someone just broke into your car. I was walking by and I saw it happen. They smashed the window and ran." He was the perfect victim. He was furious, flustered, his usual calm composure completely gone. I stayed on the phone with him, guiding the police to the scene, all the while knowing he had left his apartment keys, the keys to the office, sitting on the counter by his front door. He had told me once that he never took his fall set of keys into the city, just in case. While he was distracted, dealing with the police, with the broken window, with the violation of his own property, I had another person on my team, a professional locksmith I had hired with my own money, who was already at his apartment building, letting me into his home. The kind, fatherly man had a broken window, and I, his favorite doll, was about to have a look inside his toy box. Walking into his apartment was like stepping into the mind of a spider. On the surface, it was immaculate, a bachelor's sparsely decorated and obsessively neat home. But the air was thick with a sense of hidden, meticulous evil. My locksmith, a silent, grim-faced man who had asked no questions, let me in and then disappeared, leaving me alone in the belly of the beast. I had a 20-minute window. That was the time I estimated it would take for him to deal with the police and get a cab home. I didn't waste a second. I went straight for his desk, the place where a man like him would keep his secrets. His computer was password protected, a dead end, but I wasn't looking for digital files. I was looking for something real. In the bottom drawer of his desk, under a stack of old utility bills, I found it, a small metal lockbox. It was heavy. I didn't have time to try and pick the lock. My heart pounding, I took the box and a single, nondescript key from his key hook by the door, a key that didn't match any of the locks in our building, and then I walked out, leaving his apartment exactly as I had found it. Back in my own apartment, I broke the lockbox open with a hammer, the violent act a satisfying release of my pent-up rage. Inside was the heart of his operation. There were stacks of cash, and there was a hard drive. I plugged it into my laptop, my hands shaking. The drive wasn't encrypted. He was arrogant. He never thought anyone would ever get this far. The drive contained his entire kingdom. It was all there. The raw, unedited video files from every camera he had ever installed. Not just in my apartment, but in the other apartments in the building. There were folders, labeled by apartment number, doll #3, doll #5. I was not the first. I was just the latest in a long line of victims. There were spreadsheets detailing the crypto payments from his watchers with usernames and transaction IDs. There was a list of his subscribers, a disturbing cross-section of society, and there was the software he used to run the website, the keys to his entire digital fortress. I had him. I had everything. I copied the entire contents of the hard drive onto my own. I took the key. And then I waited. He came home late that night, angry and agitated. He told me about the random act of vandalism on his car. I made him tea. I listened with my face full of sympathy. I was the perfect, caring tenant, comforting my poor, beleaguered landlord. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. The next day, a Saturday, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. The key I had taken from his apartment had to be the key to the office. I took a cab to the anonymous office park, the blue dot of the GPS confirming I was in the right place. I found the office, a small, unmarked door at the back of the building. The key slid into the lock and turned. I was in. The room was a server farm, a web of humming computers and blinking lights. This was the nerve center. This was the dollhouse. But I wasn't there to destroy his equipment. I was there to leave my final message. I had brought my own laptop. I bypassed his firewall, his arrogance had made him sloppy, and I accessed the administrator panel of his website. I had his passwords, his access codes, everything from the hard drive. I had the keys to the kingdom. I wrote a simple piece of code, a script that would activate at a specific time, 8 p.m. that night, his peak viewership hour. The script would do two things. First, it would reroute every live feed from the apartments, from all the dolls, to a single looped video. A video of me, sitting in a chair, looking directly into the camera in my living room, holding up a series of handwritten signs. The first sign said, "We know you are watching." The second said, "The police have your username." The third said, "Welcome to the dollhouse." The second thing the script would do was even more important. It would take the subscriber list, the list of every single watcher with their usernames and the email addresses they had signed up with, and it would email that list to two places: the lead detective on the FBI's Cybercrimes Division, whose contact information I had found online, and the news desk of the biggest investigative journalism outlet in the city. I set the script, and then I left. I went home and I waited. At 8 p.m., I was sitting on my sofa watching my own live feed through the Tor browser on my laptop. I watched as my normal looped footage was suddenly replaced by the video of me with the signs. And then I watched the chat forums explode into a supernova of pure, unadulterated panic. The watchers were rats in a trap, and they were watching the doors slam shut. The final act was a masterpiece of his own making. As I knew he would, Abernathy, seeing his entire network collapse, would have panicked. He would have raced to his office to try and regain control. And that's where the police, whom I had called with an anonymous tip an hour earlier, were waiting for him. They caught him there in his server room, red-handed, surrounded by the evidence of his vast secret empire. The aftermath was a media firestorm. The story of the dollhouse landlord was everywhere. The subscriber list was a treasure trove for the authorities, leading to dozens of arrests. The other dolls in my building were finally freed, their privacy restored. We formed a strange, resilient little family, a support group of survivors who had been unknowingly connected by the most profound violation. I moved out of that apartment. It was never a home. It was a stage, and the show was finally over. The legal proceedings were long and complex, but with the evidence from the hard drive, the outcome was never in doubt. Abernathy will spend the rest of his life in prison, a place where he is the one who is being watched, 24/7. I live in a new place now, a small house with a garden. The first thing I did when I moved in was to hire a security expert to sweep for bugs. He found nothing. My life is quiet. It is private. It is my own. The man I thought was a saint was a monster, a predator hiding behind a mask of kindness. He thought he was untouchable, hidden in the shadows of the dark web, but he made one mistake. He underestimated his final doll. He thought I was just another pretty thing to put in his house. He never realized that I was the one who was going to burn it all down.